Okay, we're live. What you need?
Seeing if I can get some change from you.
Okay, let's see what I got.
Hi, Greg, you want to mute yourself?
Sure will.
Thank you, just for now. Yeah, aloha, everyone. Welcome to the August 23rd meeting of the Hawaii Hemp Task Force. And I know we have some housekeeping first with regard to meeting notices and how people can access things. So I'll hand it over and then roll call. So I'll hand it back over to DOA. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Dalton. I'm IT here at Department of Agriculture. For internet, telephone, and in-person access when testifying, you will be asked to identify yourself and the organization, if any, that you represent. Each testifier will be limited to 2 minutes of testimony per agenda item. If internet and phone connection is lost, the meeting may reconvene when either audiovisual communication or audio-only communication is established within 30 minutes. The public may access the reconvene meeting by clicking the link again or calling one of the numbers provided. If it is not possible to reconvene the meeting within 30 minutes after an interruption, then check the agency's website for information as to whether the meeting will be continued to an alternative date and time, or the meeting may be terminated. For those of you that are joining via internet right now, as an attendee, your microphone will be automatically muted during the meeting unless you are providing testimony. For each agenda item you wish to testify on, please click the raise hand button found on your Zoom screen. The task force will individually enable each testifier to unmute their microphone. When recognized by the task force meeting facilitator, please unmute your microphone before speaking and mute your microphone after you are finished speaking in order to prevent audio feedback. Any members joining? Let's see, so we don't have any members of the public joining via phone right now, but in case in the future, if you are calling in by phone, when the task force meeting facilitator asks for public testimony, you may indicate you want to testify by entering star and then 9 on your phone's keypad. After entering star and then 9, a voice prompt will let you know that the host of the meeting has been notified. When recognized by the meeting facilitator, you may unmute yourself by pressing star and then 6 on your phone. A voice prompt will let you know that you are unmuted. Once you are finished speaking, please enter star and then 6 again to mute yourself. Let's see. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we should do a roll call before we check back in again to see if there's any members of the public that want to testify. Is that correct, June? Do you want to go ahead and do the roll call for us?
I'll take a roll call, and I'm requesting all task force members to please acknowledge and say present when your name is called. So Gail is here. So Robert Benz.
Present.
Tai Chang of Hemp, Hawaii. Tai Chang.
Oh, yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Jared Dalgamuni of Hawaiian Choice. Jared's not here. Janine Hostin of Maui Majesty. Janine's not here. So Gloria Ilagan of Mauna Kea Trading. Gloria Ilagan. Gloria's not here. Kelly King of Pacific Biodiesel. Kelly King. Char Matila, proxy for Kingley of University of Hawaii. At Present. Thank you. Mikale Matsuda of Kulele.
Present.
Judaya McRoberts of Kauai Hemp Co. Judaya, not here. Liliana Napoleon of Napoleon Gentry. Liliana? I know you're there.
Does she need to unmute herself?
She's there. Okay. Brit Neal,
Present.
thank you. I'm sorry, Grant Overton,
Present.
Greg Smith.
Here,
of
present.
Others. Here. Joseph Smith of Hemp Home Hawaii,
Present.
Rusty Tuck, Kamina Ventures, Rusty, not here. Scotty Wong,
Here.
thank you. So we have a quorum. So Gail, can I say some reminders for the task force?
Sure, please go ahead, June. Thank you.
So this is just a friendly reminder. So because the task force is dissolving this coming August 30th, there is a need for urgency to focus now on your Hawaii Hemp Task Force final report that includes findings and recommendations and any proposed legislations that will be submitted to the legislature. So when we convened this Hawaii Hemp Task Force last May 17, 2024, we discussed the objectives of the task force and the responsibilities of the members and the hemp consultant, as well as DOA and DOH. So I would like to reiterate today, again, to ensure smooth and productive meetings from today until August 30th. So the main objectives of the task force actually is to generate a Hawaii Hemp Task Force final report with findings and recommendations, including any proposed legislations by August 30th, 2024. The discussion for today's meeting should maybe focus to include the findings and recommendations that you would like to be included in the final report. The recommendations of the consultant's report does not necessarily need to be fully adopted in the Hawaii Hemp Task Force final report. However, the task force can use parts of that consultant report to create their Hawaii Hemp Task Force final report that should be approved by the members on or before the task force is dissolved on August 30th. And this is prior to submission to the legislature. Thank you very much.
Is that only because we're so tight on time? Thank you, June. I just want to clarify with regard to deadline. Can we make that close of business on August 30th? So 5 p.m. Because I'm very sure there's going to be drafting up until that time. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thanks again for the reminder. You know, the agenda is very broad that was posted to the public. So I just want to put out there the task force for consideration, how to best utilize our time. And I'm just going to throw something out there and would like your input. I want to quickly review the decisions that were made at the end of the last meeting and then suggest a potential path forward for this meeting and potentially for the rest of the meeting so we can achieve what we need to achieve. I'm not locked into this, whatever we think is best, but I'm just going to throw this out as a starting point. So at the end of the last meeting, there was a vote to reject the consultant's report in its entirety. And as I recall, a second decision was made then that we would write our own, that I got nominated to draft that, and that folks would send their comments and changes to me, what they want in the report to me. We then got, and that was, we ran that by Travis at the time, and he thought that might be okay. And then upon further consideration, to make sure we're complying with sunshine law, he felt like any edits and suggestions that folks had needed to be first routed to Department of Agriculture to make sure that there was no accidental violation of sunshine law. So that's where we're at. That brings us to today, yes. And in terms of moving forward, I think I'm assuming all of us have read the report by now. Even though the task force voted to reject it, there's obviously a lot in there that we can use. They did. The consultants, first of all, I want to thank them for all their work again, and they did a great job in providing a lot of like 101 information that I'm sure a lot of people in the legislature don't know about the vast number of products that are available out there, and a lot of other background information that I think that we can use and build on. So I just want to acknowledge them. But in terms of today, what I'm thinking in terms of a potential agenda or strategy and moving this forward so we can get the report done by next Friday. First, I need a clarification from Travis and Andrew, because I believe June served as chair at the beginning of this task force until I became chair, and a lot of information was routed to them. So I'm just wondering if there was a different decision then made about sunshine law or just inconsistency there accidentally. And the only reason I bring that up is for efficiency. We're going to be working over the weekend, all of us, and no one expects June to do that or to be working during the evening. And so all of us work crazy hours, I'm sure of that. And so I'm just assuming that folks are going to be able to do their best to get me stuff this weekend. So that gives me a jump on trying to pull this all together. So I'd like clarification on that. And then in terms of today's meeting, perhaps what might be most productive is if we look at the overarching things that we all agree on in terms of recommendations. I think the things we heard over and over again is no more than federal law, getting a handle on regulatory flux, things like that. And then if we get through those general things that we agree on in terms of recommendations that apply to all sectors, then we can start looking at individual sector recommendations. But because not everyone, I think, has actually gone through and decided what they want individually as recommendations, I'm not sure how productive that would be. So that was a lot less concise than I hope to communicate that. Does anyone have any thoughts on how to proceed? And maybe what we should first do is get an answer to my question from Travis and Andrew on is it possible for me to get the comments directly from the task force members, since June was the previous chair and got communications directly from task force members, with the assumption I will not be communicating back or forwarding those to anyone on the task force? Thanks.
So I want to clarify what you just stated. DOA was never, or June was never, the chair of this task force. Their responsibility is purely administrative. So I don't
Okay.
know if that clears up any.
It does. I think
tensions
you
for you.
referred to him as chair a couple of times in the beginning. So, that may have been out of affection versus.
I don't think June was ever referred to as the chair.
I think in the first meeting, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. You're saying that his role was never as chair and it was administrative. So that makes my question mute. So, so that does make it a challenging then, for us, because June, no one expects you to work over the weekend, but hopefully folks can get you their written comments and recommendations ASAP. Anything that's not covered in today's meeting, which I think will probably be substantial. Okay, so I'll put that back out to the task force members. My thought in terms of how to proceed was, why don't we look at broad areas of recommendations or agreement that apply to all sectors, and then we can move into individual sectors. Or I'm open, obviously we're open to whatever think the task force would be the most judicious, efficient use of our time. Does anyone else have any comments or suggestions regarding how to proceed for today's meeting? Oh, yeah, Robert, go ahead. I see your hand. Are you?
Well,
Oh, there you go.
hello, Gail. I appreciate that. I would agree that's a great way to move forward. I guess my question for Andrew, because you brought up the excellent point of most state workers aren't going to be able to forward emails during the weekend, and we have a very limited time. Can we, in the last meeting, I believe it was said we can send you emails individually without violating sunshine. Could we just CC Andrew and I would hate to volunteer Sharon, but she's the only one that I know that works like a farmer outside of regular business hours at the DOA, but she might volunteer if it has to go CC route model.
So Robert, that was a question for Andrew and Travis, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Gail, can I speak? I just would like to, remind the task force that I am not a member of the task force. So I am just, here to assist, in our administrative role. So I'm helping the task force, the DOA and DOH to organize this meeting. But we would be happy to compile the task force, the recommendations and findings from the task force.
Yeah, thanks, June. We appreciate that. We know how much, I mean, just getting the agendas out and the notices the last couple of weeks with all the meetings has been a lot. So we certainly appreciate your work and just want to confirm that you'd be copying, pasting the recommendations, not compiling or editing in any way. Is that correct?
If you could say that again, please.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to confirm with June when he receives the suggestions or recommendations or edits from the task force members, he's just going to be cutting and pasting that into a document or an email. He won't be editing in any way.
Definitely, Gail. We will never be putting our. We will be. I'm just here to help you compile it. So whatever you gave us, so we will put that, and then everything will be also posted. So you will be able to, see if those are changed or not.
Oh, so you're going to post everyone's individual comments on the Hemp Task Force website? Hi, Liam. Did you have a question or comment?
No, thanks.
So just confirming, you're going to post everyone's questions or comments on the website? Because you said make comments public.
So of course, before we do that, we will let you know first. We'll inform you, and you will vet before we do that.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear June. So my question was when you receive the.
So once we compile the report, so before we post it, so we will, present it to the task force, or you can discuss it before you approve it, on or before the August 30th.
You're referring to the entirety of the report. Thank you. I believe my question, I thought I'd heard you just say that you might be putting people's individual comments up on.
Correct. That's also included there.
So that would be on the same place where you put the agenda and the Zoom meetings and stuff. You're going to put all these individual emails up there. I just want people to make sure that they understand that when they're communicating with you, that it will be posted publicly.
Yes, Gail.
Okay.
We
All
will
right.
post it to the Hawaii Hemp Task Force website.
All right, well, that's a lot of extra work for you, so thank you. And we'll make sure we let the task force members know that anything they send to you will now then be posted publicly, so to just to be aware of that when they communicate. So I don't think we yet quite answered Robert's question. Can you please, because I've already forgotten it, Robert, can you restate it for Andrew and Travis? Thank you.
Thank you. We discussed it in the last meeting that we could individually email Gail any ideas without violating Sunshine. Is that still the case? And if not, why not?
Hi, Rob. So, there is a sunshine exception for talking between two members. You can discuss things that you want to put into the report with Gail. Gail is a member, you are a member, the two of you can talk about it. You can't ask for a vote on anything, and it has to be, well, two people have to be less than a quorum, which is the case here. So you can. It is cleaner if you communicate through DOA anytime you're talking to other members, just because there's always the chance that you will forward that email to somebody else, or the discussion will get caught up. But yes, you can email Gail directly, and if you want the added layer of protection, you can copy June or myself or Travis or anyone you feel, just to kind of moderate the discussion. That is something that you can do. Just make sure you are not talking to more than one member at a time.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I guess I had a different understanding. So the task force members individually can forward their comments to me, and it would be wise to for sure copy you and June on the correspondence, just to make sure we're staying clean on everything.
Yeah, you can do it that way. And just so everybody is clear, emails and communications are, it is public record, so it doesn't have to be posted. But if somebody wants to look at these, you should always email every task force communication, thinking that any member of the public can look at this. So.
All right. Well, that's helpful, because then we can work over the weekend then. And I just heard kind of a clarification, and then it's these emails with comments, edits, recommendations can obviously be made available to the public upon request, but the DOA does not need to post them. I mean, that's
They
just
don't have to. I mean, they can. It's entirely up to you folks how you want to use the admin. I think June is making that option available and is willing to help you guys however you want, but doesn't have to.
No, I was just thinking extra work for June, but we'll leave that up to DOA to decide what they think is best. Okay, so we got clarification on communication. We can work over the weekend then. Oh, I think that's good. All right, does anyone else have any other thoughts on this part of the discussion? Okay, looks like we've got clarification. Then the other thing that I threw out there was how to proceed for today's meeting, trying to be time efficient, and we don't have to use all the time. We used a lot of time the other day. But my thought was we could, at least as a group, identify what general themes, findings, and recommendations that apply to all sectors that we agree upon, that we can make sure are emphasized in that report, because I think that was actually a bulk of the discussion last meeting. And then if we have time and the group wants to, we could dive down into a couple of sectors and begin to look at findings and recommendations that we agree on. Although it might be better to just have folks do it in writing. Any thoughts on how to proceed? Is that sound okay to folks, or is there another way you think that you guys think might be more efficient to use our time today? Well, sometimes silence is deafening, so, all right. Well, hearing no other ideas out there, and please jump in at any time. My thought is to reiterate, just to go through what we found were to be general overarching themes that we all agree on, that we want to make sure stay in the report, or general overarching themes that we didn't see in the report. So I'll just open that up to the group, and this meeting will be recorded and I'm going to be taking notes. So please fire away. Yeah, please, Brittany, go ahead.
I think one area that we might be in general agreement is needing access to increased funding across all sectors. So whether that is via grants, small, low interest loans, subsidies, I think that all of the ways that we could be tapping into financial support would greatly benefit all of the hemp producers. And being that our needs are individualized, not only because of perhaps the sector we're focusing on, but also within a sector, the project we're focusing on, to make monies available more easily that each individual could then apply to best suit their needs, I feel like would really benefit the industry in its entirety.
So when we talked about grants, are you talking about an RFP then that would be less prescriptive? I think Greg had an idea where potentially there could be like 10 grants at $100,000 or $50,000 that anyone could apply to in any of the sectors for advancing their hemp research.
Yes, absolutely. I think that multiple smaller grants would be more far-reaching than a few larger grants, as far as being able to advance all the different sectors at the same time instead of just one or a few. So I would be in favor of multiple smaller grants, but I'm not opposed to some larger grants. I just think that particularly the smaller grants, if they are geared to help support smaller scale operations, to make it so they don't have a matching fund requirement, might make them more useful to, certain smaller scale farmers. And then if they're larger grants, perhaps the matching funds would be something that could be complied with.
Okay, so for smaller grants, no matching funds. For larger grants, obviously everyone's gonna have to have some skin in the game for the larger grants. And you're also saying that these opportunities for large and smaller could be parallel processes, so we can move some larger projects forward.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So that was under funding strategies. Anyone else have anything else in terms of overall arching thought strategies with regards to all sectors? Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the smaller funded grants, but I also think that we should discuss the idea of a co-op or collective that could be sort of the overseer of the people who get the grants, and also could be responsible for whatever equipment or infrastructure that's necessary that could be shared with the people who get the grants. So there's a collective that handles the equipment and the resources that is shared, and then every farmer sort of interacts with each other to get the best results.
You're talking about for the smaller to medium-sized grants that there would potentially be one applicant. Well, it'd have to be competitive, but the preference or criteria would be that it would be a co-op.
Correct.
Okay, all right, I've got that down there as an idea. We can include that recommendation and then go back and see how the rest of the group feels about that as a criteria. Anything else, Greg?
Yeah, well, we wrote a Hawaiian hemp co-op paper back in 2017 that we would be more than willing to submit to the task force to take a look and see if it could be applied to what we're trying to do, and maybe make things a little easier.
I think I remember
And
that.
you were, and Gail, you were involved with,
Yeah.
you were involved with that.
Yeah, it was with through some help through the Kohala Center, and Steve Sakau was involved in that. So you're talking about a framework. It was a hemp cooperative, and I think you're talking about the articles of incorporation. No work was done, but so
Yeah.
so you want to make that available to the rest of the task force somehow. So why don't you send that to June and copy me, and then June can send that to the rest of the task force.
That sounds good. It definitely needs to be revised because all the people involved are not still involved, but it's a starting point.
Yeah, it's an idea for people to understand cooperative framework if they haven't yet. Okay, thank you. Any other suggestions that go across all sectors? We've been talking a little bit about funding strategies, but obviously there's issues out there that affect all sectors. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, I would agree with those excellent suggestions from Greg and Britt. I remember Kelly had some good points about trying to keep it local, and I liked that idea that Greg just had of having the co-op, if that's allowed by the rules. I think we have such leaders in the international hemp industry just between Greg and Gail alone. So if there's a way, that would be a good way to keep the grants local. And as she also mentioned, having a priority because there might be limiting funding. And I'd like the priority like the smaller scale, lower, more diverse versus the bigger scale.
Robert, if I may
That's
summarize. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's it as far as those. And then I just thought for all sectors, no buffer zones, no movement reports would help.
No buffers. No movement reports. And you're talking about buffers for both processing and production?
Correct.
No movement reports. Okay. And then everyone keeps, which is fine, is talking about funding strategies. And I heard that, I think Brittany was speaking to this a bit too, and Greg, is some kind of criteria in there, assuming the legislature does want to fund that funding would go to local businesses, which no matter what the size, I don't know whether they can specify that the applicant be a certain type, an LLC, a co-op, or a C corporation, or an individual. I don't know if the state is allowed to discriminate that way or develop criteria that way, but I do hear a preference for something that ensures the funding is prioritized for local farmers, and to the extent possible, as many people benefit locally as can. Certainly that can be an element in an RFP, I would think, that any applicant would have to speak to how, who they're involving and how many folks are being involved. I'm editorializing, Robert, so I'm sorry if I have mischaracterized what you just said. Did I capture that okay, or do you want to refine something? Because I'm taking physical notes and I'll go back and listen to the meeting, but I also don't want to.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
We also will have a text transcript on our website as well for you.
Oh, that's super helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah, Brittany, go ahead.
So again, this kind of comes back to the funding issue. And I think that an area that, again, we might be able to agree on is the need for increased bankability. Because if you can apply for a grant and get any amount of money, it would be great to be able to put that in the bank, so that however we can put that as part of our recommendation, I think that's important.
Yeah, and like many sectors, whether it's housing or business, insurance is increasingly an issue too, even without being under a hemp cannabis commission. So need for increased bankability. And do you mind if I add insurance to that as well? Stable insurance.
Yes, please do. Thank you.
I know that was something that Michaela brought up quite a bit. Yeah, there he is. Anything else, Brittany? At this moment regarding that?
No, not at the moment. Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments? I'm going to throw out there, I heard over and over again at the last meeting. Oh, there's Greg. A not to exceed federal definitions and rules. Is that something that we all agree on? I'm going to put that down unless there's some opposition to that. Go ahead, Greg Smith.
I just want to say that when I got the wasn't even a grant, it was a contract with the Department of Agriculture for a certain amount of money to do research and development for a hemp project. The Hawaii Bank was able to take my contract, which was for growing hemp, and take our checks, and was allowed to apply the money into the bank. So they were very helpful with that. And maybe we should just deal with a bank that's open to helping the hemp industry.
I think, Michaela, can you speak again to some of the challenges you had internationally too? So even if you can get a credit union here, for some of these larger operations, and Scotty might want to speak to this, there's large amounts of funding that could potentially need to be moved around, especially if you have outside investment. Grant could also speak to this, I know. Are there any particular banking issues? I mean, it's one thing to get a local bank so you can deposit things and do things locally, but what about banking issues with regards to be able to receiving and sending funds outside the state for hemp? I understood.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just understood that to be an issue. So I was interested in your feedback on that. In terms of a recommendation we could make with regard to bankability or at least identify a finding, a concern.
Well, on the banking side, the credit unions could be a little bit of an issue because of it really depends if they have a SWIFT code. Do they normally do offshore banking? And the problems I see usually is because of they have a lack of foreign currency. And basically all the banks in Hawaii don't have the foreign currency ability. So none of them have the module you add to your system in order to do multi-currency. So the bigger banks are okay because it's easy to move money in and out because they do that, like Bank of Hawaii, Central Pacific Bank, First Hawaiian Bank, the American Savings Bank. But the smaller ones or the credit unions might be a problem. I haven't done it yet, but I understand that there are problems with trying to sell them to small institutions that might not, have the ability, so they have to go to a correspondence bank, which makes it a little bit more difficult from certain foreign, like even Japan. But yeah, but having the bank, if you write on the bank transfer what the purpose of the transfer is, that's where I've seen problems. Like if the transfer is to fund a hemp business, that's where I've seen problems where they question the transfer and it could get rejected.
And this is with a bank that you already had an account with and has those international banking capabilities. So,
oh yeah, Bank of Hawaii, they canceled it, canceled my personal bank, canceled my wealth account. Even the wealth manager managing the account was surprised because it was done by their internal compliance department. And the problem is that it's not, it's the compliance departments and all these banks review the changes that happen on the federal level related to banking, but they're very slow to updating their internal checks and balances to change things from um, their their policy. So like even though hemp now is removed from type 1 and is legal, they haven't updated their internal checks and controls yet to reflect the difference between hemp and marijuana. And I don't think they're going to do that. They're more of them are just waiting for the federal government to just say it's, you can do hemp and marijuana.
Oh, well, yeah, and I don't know that marijuana is going to be completely descheduled, so I think it's going to continue to be an issue.
Yeah.
And we heard that from hemp farmers in other states. Um, it's still a need. I hear with regard to the internal controls, and then kind of reflecting back on what Greg was just saying, I wonder, we can't tell the banks necessarily what to do, but we could, one of the recommendations might be that the state create a generic letter that goes out to the banks here in Hawaii and reemphasizes that hemp's a legal business. These guys have licenses to do these things, to just kind of provide an extra element of assurance. Is there any other recommendation?
Well, it really should be the state, or they pass something that says that the banking industry, the insurance industry, and if you want, like the real estate property industry, cannot discriminate against legal federal businesses and legal state businesses, and that would be broad enough to cover this. Then there's a way to go back to the bank and say, look, the state says you can't discriminate against a federal legal business, and hemp is federally legal. So then the argument can be made to the bank. Right now, the bank, because there's nothing forcing them to say that they cannot discriminate against federal legal banking regulations, they do.
Okay, that's an excellent suggestion, recommendation that we actually recommend a legislation that will tell the banks that they can't discriminate anymore. Okay. That's a legislative fix you just recommended, correct? Not just a nice letter asking please.
No, I don't think that will work, because there's too many layers in the bank for the letter to even get anywhere.
Okay, gotcha. Right. They'll pay more attention to what they have to comply with. Was there any other suggestions with regard to banking insurance? Paula, that you can think of? If you're done, I see Robert's got his hand raised. Go ahead, Robert.
I was just gonna agree with that suggestion and it's not just for the banks, but for the insurance companies, because it's probably individual by individual. Like I've been okay with Bank of Hawaii, but my insurance agent, who helps everybody in my family, all a bunch of friends, she couldn't help with the insurance. So just, and I think you also mentioned like anybody, so that could help for a lot of different state, federal, like there are protections for medicinal cannabis. If you're using it, they can't evict you. That kind of general protection to help with a broad things. I love that. I thought that was a great suggestion.
So you're actually suggesting almost a broader piece of legislation that was specific to banking, insurance, real property. And are you talking about protections for the end users of hemp products?
Yeah, that's even better. It's a separate issue, but when we were talking earlier about not exceeding federal regulations, if the state could go even further, how the state protects the medical dispensaries which are violating federal law clearly, if the state could protect legal hemp farmers. For instance, we can test 30 days prior to harvest. If it tests good, we have a good test, we're allowed to sell it. If somebody, for any reason, were to test it and then it was later hot, even though it passed that initial test, if there was a way to have the state kind of do the opposite of what it's been doing for so many years and try to go to bat to protect the hemp farmers in any way possible.
Well, you know, to follow on what you're saying, Robert, you're with regard to testing specifically, I lost my train of thought. Well, there is no requirement by the state, and in Act 263, I think eliminated the state's ability to test hemp. It doesn't eliminate law enforcement's, ability ever. I mean, if they ever suspect things, they can come onto our farm and do whatever they want.
Correct. That's what I was thinking. If you had a product that tests good at that 30-day note mark, then according to the USDA, it's federally legal. So if there was any other third party or law enforcement test and it was 4% or 5% protection, based on that initial test being the one that is required by federal law. Just pretty much extra protection and
Yeah, I think the only time that would become an issue is during transport. And I'm not sure, by 4 or 5%, you weren't speaking about THC because that would be ridiculously high. You're talking, were you
I
talking?
meant 0.3, 0.4 or 5. I see a lot of the other states, they'll have their product sold and it'll have a test result of 0.5, which is clearly above the limit. The only way I can think of that being the case is they tested it, it was under the limit, but by the time it was sold, it was over the limit. But according to federal law, that test for the harvest is the only test. So even if it goes to 0.4, 0.5, it should be kind of protected by the state, because my point is the state's protecting clearly federally illegal cannabis operations now. If a farmer tests, they do the test that's required by the USDA. It is below 0.3. It might creep up a little bit, but not too much above that 0.3 mark. If law enforcement were to test, they could potentially say, oh, this is no longer hemp. But if state law was more permissive, they could say this is hemp because that initial test says it's hemp.
Okay, so that's interesting. So we're asking for additional protections for farmers if there's if for some reason someone decided to test their crop. Right now, that only someone would be law enforcement, but let's say they did and it was above 0.3%. We're asking for some kind of buffer of forgiveness so the farmer doesn't have to destroy its crop, because there are changes in compounds, obviously, that can occur. Okay, that's your suggestion for legislation or policy?
Yeah, just more of overall certain states where they really go to protect the hemp farmers and their interpretation of federal law is really beneficial to hemp farmers. If the state was like that, it would make I think hemp farmers feel a little bit more comfortable.
Okay, so it's both a policy and a legislative recommendation. Thanks, Robert. I think Michaela's hand was up and then Brittany, please go ahead.
I think to get clarification from HDOA, but I thought we only are required to make that one official test. And then if it does test below, we are able to harvest within 30 days. And we are no longer required to do any more testing on the plant, the harvest material, the biomass, and we can sell it. But I think we should clarify with the HDOA because that's my understanding.
That's absolutely correct. It is. And there is no, Act 263, as far as I recall, but DOA can speak to this, eliminated the ability to test outside of the harvest testing. Now, it doesn't stop law enforcement from ever doing that. And I think maybe that's what Robert was speaking to, is if for some reason there's a transport and they're suspicious and it comes out, 0.33, that he doesn't automatically assume that, it loses crop because of that. So you're correct. But June, do you want to speak to that, or someone at DOA, or maybe one of the AGs? Just to make sure I'm not AG, just verify.
Gail, so this is Leo Baldo. So regarding Act 263, basically any testing outside of the requirements of USDA, you don't have anything to do anymore.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, appreciate that. Okay, Brittany, go ahead.
So similarly to how we just discussed passing, or the state passing legislation that would prevent anti-discrimination or discrimination for a federally legal hemp business to be able to be bankable. It seems like a similar either legislation or policy that recommend or that would require employers to not be allowed to discriminate against employees that test positive for THC because it could be from a legal hemp source. Again, like on the discussion of kind of like bolstering some of the protections for different groups of people, whether it be, businesses, farmers. I think we also could put in recommendations to prevent discrimination against employees by their employers for using a federally legal full spectrum hemp product.
So you're primarily talking about if they test positive for THC?
Well, being that is the criteria that is currently used, THC, the presence of THC in an individual's system doesn't necessarily identify if that was from an illicit cannabis source or from a federally legal compliant full spectrum hemp crop. And so it potentially could create a problem in the developing industry if we're trying to say, we want to have this industry be able to sell various hemp products locally to be consumed by local people. That would be something that's kind of like a logical progression of protections that need to be afforded, is somebody to be able to use a compliant full spectrum hemp product without that jeopardizing their employment.
I can understand the need for that. That's outside my area of expertise. I almost want to call on DOH because I'm assuming for, I'm guessing for like alcohol, right? If an employer does a test and there's trace amounts of alcohol or however they do that, it's not an issue, but there's certain limits. So I'm assuming that, public safety and workforce safety still plays a role in there, and there must be some kind of, I don't know if they've set limits anywhere on what would constitute, yeah, you're okay. And no, you're not. I know they've tried that for driving, but I think there's a lot of research shows that's all over the map. Do you understand what I'm trying to get at, Brittany? That-
I believe so. So I don't believe currently that the test is being used to quantify the level of THC necessarily. It's that, is it present or not? And so being that somebody could be using a full spectrum hemp product that's completely federally legal, but then if their employer did a drug test, they would test positive for THC, and their employment potentially could be terminated, or maybe they don't get a job because of it. And so that is just a problem that potentially could be addressed through our recommendations. If legislation could be passed that would prevent that type of discrimination from being allowed to happen in the workplace. It doesn't necessarily address, I mean, potentially, I guess, like when you discussed the need for safety in the workplace, that would have to be somehow related to like job performance, and like, was there an event that they were unsafe that they could be terminated based on? But just the presence of THC doesn't imply that somebody is unsafe. And especially if that THC is from a hemp source, which again is federally legal.
Sure. So I wrote down the recommendation you want is protections for end users of THC in workplace testing. That's the recommendation you put forward. And we can certainly go ahead.
Sorry, and I would specify that it's hemp-derived THC.
Of course, yes, thank you. And then at some point, I don't know that we'll have time before August 30th, but I think this would be a great place for an ongoing task force where we could have this conversation with DOH, right? Because we want protections for people so they're not discriminated against now or in the future. And we also want to protect the broader public out there against intoxicating behaviors. So that's an excellent point. And I think this is a place where we can have more conversations with DOH to refine any legislation that way. Those are just my thoughts. Now I'm editorializing your recommendation. I'll just put your recommendation as you stated it, and I'll leave my thoughts out of that. So.
That is a great point, though. I'm in agreement with the ongoing conversation to be able to find common ground on some of these issues as we move forward. I think that some sort of recommendation that can be included as part of our report that would create that situation to occur on an ongoing basis. We'll be able to hopefully figure out a way to get everybody's needs met and be able to advance this industry. But I think that ongoing conversations are absolutely crucial to that happening.
So that's a second recommendation there that's related to what you're just saying, a forum or something for ongoing conversations with regulatory agencies. Okay, thank you. Greg and then Michaela. Go ahead, Greg.
I wanted to follow up on that and take it to the next step. So after you harvest your crop and you've got a compliant crop and you take it in to be processed, and it becomes a crude, which is then eventually turned into a product that's put into whatever you put it into, that crude is always going to be hot. So we remember at one of the conversations, there was a discussion that there is some kind of leeway between the crude and the finished product, so that if you take it and you dilute it down to where it's compliant, it's acceptable. But there's that moment where it's a crude and it is still hot. So can we put that into some kind of legislation that says that there is some kind of, I think the Department of Agriculture or Department of Health said that they were going to not try to persecute anybody who has a hot crude, as long as that crude is being made into a finished product that's compliant. Is that correct?
Yeah, DOH has created a pathway for crude to be used and also be held in its temporary state. So they gave a presentation on that a couple of weeks ago, and we could have them come back and talk about that again, but I think your question was, do we need extra protections for people who may be holding crude temporarily before it ends up in an end user product?
Correct.
All right, I'll put that down as a question and let's have that clarified. I don't know how we're gonna do that because June, since we don't have, this is part of the broader discussion for the hemp task force. So if we wanted DOH to answer that today or in another meeting, they could do so, correct? All right. Okay. Oh, sure. Go ahead. I know you guys did a couple weeks ago. Go ahead.
You can sit, or you can sit. So make sure they can hear me. Yeah. Oh. It's fine. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, aloha, Greg. Is that Greg?
Okay,
Yes, I'm here.
who's on here now? No, sorry, another Greg, Department of Health, just responding to that. So if you are a permitted hemp processor, and you're making crude, and it will obviously, well, most likely jump above that 0.3, our rules don't, have any issue with that happening. You just can't release it for sale to the next hemp processor, on down the line, which is the way the rules, the proposed rules have been drafted. And keep in mind, crude can't be made yet. It's been authorized under 263 pursuant to rules, change in the interim rules, which we have that as proposed, but it's not finished yet. You know, but to answer your question, if it jumps up above 0.3 during the extraction process, our regulations, you know, don't have anything, don't find that a problem. It's just when you then get it tested, it has to be tested to 0.3 total THC or less before you move it out of the facility onto the next hemp processor in-state, permitted hemp processor in-state, or to another processor out of state, which would be the two pathways forward for the crude.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, you guys had a nice flow chart up the other week that explained that. Is that, I think that answers your question, correct, Greg? Greg
Yes,
Smith?
it does. That helps. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm gonna call on the folks that have hands up, but just to, you know, I don't know if it's a reminder, but if we can kind of stick to things that are more broad, that apply to everyone in the industry, that'd be great. I mean, to all sectors. Let's see, I think Michaela was next.
So I was just going to add on to what Brittany was saying, but the state can control what happens in the state legally. So, this issue about, what we're talking about, at the state level, they should change the regulations so that state employees or any state any businesses doing business in the state of Hawaii, should not be, we shouldn't, if they have to test for drugs and it comes out that they have a THC level, a minute THC level, because they use a product that was approved, produced by a registered state of Hawaii processor, they shouldn't be penalized. At the federal level, it might be difficult, like, on the military bases and things like that. But at a state level and state-run businesses, like, the construction industry, or, like, as long as it doesn't impede with what they're doing, they shouldn't, reprimand the employees if they test positive for THC because they used a product produced in the state of Hawaii by a state registered processor. So the state itself should be able to govern that. I mean, they should be able to vote on whether that can be done or not, and that would make a big difference because a large portion of the state does work for industries that does drug testing, and I've known a lot of people who won't buy the product because they don't want to test positive.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, good point. Robert Bentz, and then I'll go back to Brittany and Greg if your hands are up. Still, go ahead, Robert.
Mostly agreeing with the previous testimony. I've heard about people failing tests and like was just mentioned, they can do a lot of good because they control all of the state. We're always kind of behind the market, national market in Hawaii. And I almost lowered my hand, but I really think this helps all the sectors because fiber growing from any type of hemp is good for herd, which is what we really need for the building. Growing for maturity, it's the best quality of herd. And the most profitable market by far right now is the potentially intoxicating hemp derivatives, or IHDs for short. There's an article that I should email to June. It's from attorney Bob Hoburn. He's a leading attorney, and it also cites economist Bo Whitney, and it states that the states that have the most robust hemp market are the ones that are allowing what I was just earlier this year kind of against, but I am against the synthetic versions. But if they're naturally derived THC, even Delta 9 THC, even THCA, or the gummies or the beverages that have maybe 5 milligrams, those are the most lucrative markets, and that could be scaled up if that was available in Hawaii. Like Kelly mentioned, that's what they wanted to do, but it makes no sense because you can import all those things right now from anywhere online. It's completely legal. You can get them shipped to your door, but you can't produce them in Hawaii. So if the state just made it 21 and over and no synthetics, but if Hawaii growers were able to sell the whole variety of what the Farm Bill currently makes legal, that would be a major benefit for the state.
Thanks, Robert. So that's kind of diving down into sector, but I do hear that you're saying that when you have a thriving cannabinoid sector, it tends to uplift all the other sectors. And I did hear that a recommendation for age gating and no synthetics. And I think, if I recall correctly, Jared from Hawaiian Choice, another task member, had forwarded those recommendations to Char and Megan, and they read those off the other day. So I made note of both of those recommendations you just suggested. I'm going to jump in for a second and be a task force member. One of the recommendations I really like that's in the report is a full-time FTE for DOA to provide technical assistance, and a full-time FTE for DOH to also provide technical assistance. I don't know how much of that they might need for enforcement as well. So I obviously want to continue that recommendation. One of the things that someone else might have something else to say about the FTAs, but I like to do that. The other thing that I think cuts across all sectors is the regulatory flux. I mean, here it is, we're suggesting more legislation. I'm loath to ever write another or testify again. But I think it's certainly something that we've all talked about profoundly, is how having legislation that looks like it's changing the playing field in a way that could potentially impact in what an investor might consider to be stable playing ground is impacted. I mean, one person just shared that, they're not bringing their investment here, which was going to be $230 million in Hawaii. So we know it's big numbers. So I just want to reinforce that. That affects all of us: building sector, cannabinoid, energy, plastics. So that's a recommendation that the consultants had in the report, and I want to keep going to this three: the FTEs and the regulatory flux. Brittany, you have something else you want to add with regard to general recommendations?
Sure, thank you. I wanted to touch just briefly on what Greg from Department of Health just laid out very clearly for us. Thank you very much for your breakdown of crude. And I just wanted to recommend that part of our recommendations be that the Department of Health send a letter to law enforcement that clearly states that crude is allowable under the hemp program to be hot in that intermediate phase. And obviously it wouldn't be sold at that time or transferred, but just so there is an awareness of law enforcement that that is not a violation of the law, to again add a protection for hemp processors within the state. So that was just a really quick thing I wanted to throw out there. And then I wanted to get back to things that are a little bit more broad. Going to the recommendation that you just brought up, Gail, about having the full-time employees in the two different departments, that I think it would be really important for us to provide a specific job description of what those full-time employees would be responsible for with regards to the hemp program, just so as Kelly had previously mentioned, there's no potential for them being used to fill other shortages elsewhere. So I think that would be a good protection to add in there. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up as far as something that would benefit us across sectors is to have some sort of standardized language regarding the way that we talk about hemp, and specifically like manufactured hemp products, because there can be some confusion that it occurs because it could be, a tincture, a topical, a hempcrete building material, etc., that we have a agreed upon language that we use to describe these different things, just to facilitate understanding and clarity as we move forward with this evolving industry.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that was something the group was generally opposed to in the report, that it was creating definitions that are not at the federal level, like separating out cannabinoid hemp and then calling it industrial hemp. So we'll have to find a way to resolve that recommendation, but I wrote it down, Brittany.
Thank you.
Greg, go ahead.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, I'm out picking up signs for the farmers market, so I'm kind of in and out. But I think that one issue that I'd like to get off of this and talk a little bit more about the farmer and the farm situation and the importance of research and the importance of education and the need to be able to get some kind of subsidies and support there's thousands of genetics out there that are, being grown for hemp fiber cannabinoids, and many of them won't apply here in Hawaii, but we really haven't done the research to find out which ones are the best. If we start growing crops that are going to fail, we're going to have issues because of the short amount of sun and the different types of climate issues. We need to get that understood before we move very much further, because if we can't get the crop to come in and be successful, then we're never going to have an industry. So there's still a major need for research and education, and I think that needs to be mentioned in the proposal.
Yeah, and it was also in the consultant's report. Agreed. There is more need for research, and I just wrote that down. And people like yourselves and Grant's done extensive research. UH has done some research too, but there's more that needs to be done. So I wrote that down, and that there needs to be support for that, probably at various scales as well. And then with regard to education, there's so much to learn about hemp. So I suppose if we want to, in this report, it's one thing to say to educate the public, but if we can identify some key things, maybe it's just letting folks know about the diversity of products that are available, so we can create more of a desire and interest, or you know, I don't know what it might be, but if we can come up with some more specific education, that would be great. I know I personally, I'm just gonna throw mine in there. I think there should be money for, I guess it's education, but also marketing for the Hawaii brand. I'm not sure if that's marketing and education are exactly the same. But let's try to think of some specific educational recommendations. You can email them in or bring them up at the next meeting. And let's see. Robert, your hand is up.
Yeah, I was gonna build on Greg's excellent suggestion there. The USDA could work with the USDA ARS. They have a germplasm repository. And I believe it's Oregon that works a lot with anybody that wants to grow. It'll give them a lot of free seeds. So if UH was able to provide free seeds to farmers to do variety trials, it's a benefit for the farmers because they get free seeds, but it's also a benefit for the university. And years back, we were talking with the university up here at the Kula extension. Somebody was talking about how they can do tissue culture, and tissue culture can be certified organic. And they were saying if you get an interesting variety of an exotic plant, you could bring it to them. They'd make about like 1 million tissue culture clones of that plant. Then they'd release it all at once because they can make the money and get the good price. But I like that method versus the method of people make a new variety and they say they own that variety of seed. I know that's probably too contentious to get into the bill, but if the seeds developed by that program were given the respect of the people that grew it and the recognition, and that generated the money on that initial release. But if there wasn't long-term contracts or any claim to proprietary ownership over that genetic, so that's a pretty much overarching
Yeah, it
method
really is.
of using the universities and the Department of Education to really create that circular economy versus licensing from another outside company. There's amazing people in Hawaii that are already making things with plastic from the ocean rubbish and making plastic using solar. There's amazing metal fabrication. I have friends that can do a lot. So through the STEM education curriculum at the public school level, and then a really robust university partnership between the farmers where they don't only help provide all the hemp farmers with seed, but they help as a repository of knowledge. I remember when I was a UH student, we did some consulting work for farmers. So the university could help with consulting for businesses, the marketing that was mentioned earlier, the engineering department, and they can get a lot of grants.
So, thanks. That's a lot, all good stuff and number of it overarching. So you're saying to utilize our existing UH expertise, and potentially there could be collaborations between farmers on the ground doing research and the UH, which I really like. I think that that's when you really get better transfer of knowledge, is when the farmers are actually involved in some of the experiments as opposed to research stations alone. That's my own personal editorial there, but then I also heard you say something that I think is important and as a recommendation, and that is that things that the public funds support in terms of whether it's setting up businesses or research or whatever, then it should be open source. Because it's taxpayer money that went into it. So maybe some way to recoup cost if the grants don't provide for that. But for the most part, it should be open source. And then I heard a number of specific educational recommendations. It almost sounds like a curriculum opportunity here. And to tap, I'll try to find a way to word this, but potential, I mean, there are some incubator programs. So maybe making some funding or opportunities available for businesses, hemp businesses to access that expertise through the state's incubator programs. Did I capture that okay, Robert?
Yeah, that was great. I was just agreeing with that incubator, like Go Farm is great.
Okay, thank you. Greg Smith, your hand's still up. Do you have any general findings or recommendations you wanted to throw out there? Excuse me.
No, I just didn't push the button. That was it. No, nothing right at this time.
No worries. Are there any other general recommendations or overarching things? Yeah, Michaela, go ahead.
This is kind of new. It's like, I don't know if this is the timing is good or not, but I've been working on similar to what I did in Macau and Japan. The federal government has a non-immigrant visa program for so there's a visa called H-2A for agriculture, and there are various other things in agriculture and other sectors. But it would be good if the state or somebody brought up to the state, maybe within this document or maybe later on in the future, that the state could provide support for these people who get approved to come here. For instance, a lot of people when they first come here have no money. The same as like happened in Macau, same in Japan, where had to bring in a lot of people from other countries. So, one thing we did was petition the city governments to provide interest-free loans to these people for X amount of money. So when they come, they have money to, even get a cell phone, even buy even rent an apartment and all this kind of stuff. And their pay would be garnished by the city government. So the city government kind of knew they would get paid back as long as the employer who worked together to get the visa approved, agreed with this, and they would pay from as garnished from their salaries. And these people then would be able to work in Japan was different years, but in the U.S., I think the H-2A visa is up to 3 years. And, it could be also like anybody providing rental to them for, like we did in another place, they would get what they call a waiver of their annual real estate tax. So these things wouldn't cost the government too much money, and it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be difficult to implement if you tie it to certain things. But one of my biggest problems today is actually finding workers. The average, based on last year's numbers, the average salary for the mean salary for a farmer is $17.60. The medium is $16.30, per hour. And that's including everybody, all the farmers last year that work in the field. So, you're looking at right now at least $18 plus for a farmer. And, come harvest time, if you have 9 acres, you're looking at 6, 7, 8 people. So one of my biggest issues is the labor side. I don't know if it's too late to recommend to the state that they provide programs for approved H-2A non-immigrant workers. And there are all these other sectors too, but we can look at.
Yeah, no, it's not too late. And I mean, that's such it's such an interesting issue, labor in general. But that's certainly a significant issue in all sectors of agriculture, not just hemp, and throughout the state, outside agriculture as well. So I wrote that down as a recommendation. And obviously that's going to be super important for people who are doing more at scale. I wrote it down for sure. And I would say that the farm worker wages at 17, 16, 16.30, that's primarily labor. And if you own your own farm, it's actually negative. You make no money. And that's just a commentary. Is there anything else, Michaela?
No.
Okay. I don't know who had their hand up first, Robert or Brittany, but I think we just heard from Robert. So I'll go Brittany first, then Robert. Go ahead.
So just kind of something to explore based on what Michele just brought up is I don't know if we could recommend that the state somehow subsidize labor costs for hemp farms as opposed to trying to bring farm workers from outside here, again, just to stimulate our local circular economy. Like farmers need workers, people want to get paid a certain wage. It's a very real expense. But if we could have a little bit of assistance that would offset that labor cost, but again, keep that money local, I would always like to see that as an option. And then with regards to using hempcrete and other hemp-related building materials in Hawaii, if there is a way that we could, if we could recommend that the state update the codes, the building codes, to add hempcrete specifically as it was allowed under the 2024 International Residential Code. And I know that there might be an issue with regards to an emergency proclamation, but it seems like if it can be phrased in a way that is this is like a solution to help address the emergency situation, like would it be allowable to update the code somehow or to make another emergency proclamation that this be allowed per the 2024 IRC because we have these issues with emergency housing needs?
I do recall that there is recommendations in the report to work with the counties to update their building codes. And you're right, emergency proclamations are sometimes the pathway to, it is an emergency situation here. So I wrote them down as both recommendations, and I'm going to have to go back and look the consultants recommended under that. Thanks, Brittany.
Thank you.
Robert, you have your hand up?
Oh, building on the excellent previous commentators, I've had similar issues with trying even at $18 an hour in Maui. It can be challenging. And the great idea of keeping it local, I haven't asked them, but maybe we could ask them as a task force. They probably would be open to it. There's the Kupuaina Conservation Corps of youth workers, and they already do a lot of great work. But if the state was able to give them funding and offer a really competitive wage, like 25 to 30 even, and have it focus on the environmental benefits of hemp and the need for hempcrete to rebuild all of Lahaina. There's so much history, like ancestors being locked up in those jails and stuff like that. So hempcrete is a really good way to restore old buildings like there. And it's a good way to have local products. So I think that would, as most good farmers in Hawaii know, we have ability to access lots of land pretty easily, but being able to pay the workforce that is required to do a larger scale operation, I think that's a good way to keep it local.
Gotcha. So you're building on both what Michaela and Brittany were saying, and then also with regard to the opportunity for supporting the rebuild on Maui, and also tapping into potentially getting the Kupu, I forgot which, KUPA or KUPU, I've forgotten.
PU.
Yeah, oh, yeah. We had them on our farm about 5 years ago or 4 years. Good kids. To help with that would be, yeah, because labor is the issue, no matter where you are. So in terms of recommendations, recommendation about the core being subsidized, and then I know I'll go back in there and read what the consultant said. I mean, they put a lot of emphasis on building, which is correct. I mean, it really does move this whole industry forward. It's what all of us who've been in it for decades too have wanted to see, a robust building industry, and especially because of the needs on Maui. We're gonna have to dive into the specifics of that probably next meeting. Brittany,
And
go ahead, Robert.
oh, sorry, just building on that previous with all it really takes, like there was recommendations to license. I think UH could help with that too, because we could do more to build a circular economy as a birthplace of innovative ideas. So the ASTM is pretty much the standard. So if we can develop a product that farmers can produce, and it's pretty easy. So farmers could do a lot of it on farm and kind of capture more profits than on the traditional method where they only get a small percentage of that money for the building.
Well, that's true. I mean, the value added is where farmers make money. And so that kind of speaks to different ways in which these larger projects could be done. They could be cooperative, they could be farmers get a percentage of the final end product. It could be that farmers do more on their farm with low tech technology to be able to participate in these markets. So I put all of those down. Okay. Anything else, Robert?
I won't take up any more time. Thank you very much.
Oh, no, it's free flow. It's all good. Everyone's got good ideas. Go ahead, Brittany.
Something I just wanted to suggest that on the topic of hempcrete be emphasized is based on my understanding that there is a certain like fire retardant property of hempcrete. And so I feel like that's so valuable moving towards the future to have more fire resistant building materials available to us in Hawaii. I mean, it's just something like looking towards like how do we mitigate the potential for disasters in the future. I feel like hempcrete is kind of like one of those multifaceted layers of it will bring benefit to help reduce the impact of wildfire disasters if they're just commonplace building materials that are accessible and available in Hawaii. So really just emphasizing that like fire retardant property of the hempcrete in particular.
Yeah, we can pull that out. The consultants did a good job of breaking down all the characteristics of hemp building materials, and the fact that it doesn't mold as easily, et cetera. But we can certainly, because being resilient to natural disasters is at the forefront, not just here, but around the world. We can emphasize that up front more in the building section, for sure.
This is Greg.
Hi, Greg.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the one thing that I think I like to mention is the fact that we have this catch-22 that if we as farmers want to grow this plant, we have no way to get it processed. So if we want to do the research, we're not going to be able to make any money because the product can't even be processed. So it's going to be really important to subsidize the research so that we can get our head around what are the best genetics and what are the best processes and techniques to grow this plant in Hawaii, and be able to share that with everyone. So I think it's important that whatever research we do, there is some kind of subsidy to the people that are doing the research until we get to the point where we can actually process and make a living, which we could be in easily a year away before we even see anything like that. But at least we could have the research done, and techniques in which to grow it could be documented and shared with everyone.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we already all know what it's like to grow hemp and not be able to make money.
Yeah.
It's just not viable. So I think for, especially for these aspects where there isn't immediately an end user, but it's critical to advancing the industry, there isn't immediately a market for the hemp or the knowledge that may be produced. I think that is where the bridge funding comes in from the state. I don't think we can expect the state to pay for everything. That's just ridiculous. No industry does that. And I would say that I think the consultants, obviously there's a lot of disagreement about cultivation. There was disagreement, or not disagreement, there was need expressed for also small scale processing, but the consultants did lay out a pathway for creating a building industry that did include a couple of large processors and emphasizing that. And I think Brittany at the beginning of this session underscored that we could have parallel processes. We could recommend to the state that it looks at how to build these public-private relationships with regard to large processor, while also simultaneously supporting small fiber processing, whether it's through some of the stuff that I've just recently learned about, or in terms of processors and equipment that's available, or we just hamajang put it together ourselves, because that is actually what's happening in a lot of states with regards to small processing, scale processing, which isn't necessarily small, whether it's for grain or for fiber. So Greg, to go back to what you're saying, yeah, there needs to be support for those activities that advance the industry for which there's no immediate ability to pay, because people can't continue to do this on pocket. We did that for 2 years. All of us that got research licenses in 2018, basically did free research for 2 years for the state. And our research report was extensive. We looked at different watering techniques, methodologies, all this kind of stuff. So point well taken. And then just also emphasizing that things I think the consultants did well and the report had was the sense of urgency and immediacy about trying to build these the fiber in the building sectors. And there is a pathway there, and we can pull out the parts that we don't like out of the report, but there is a framework there we can build on. Is there anything against us? Against us? Is there anything else anyone wants to add at this point? I think after the other day's meeting and being the end of the week, I know I'm a little bit, I'm always willing to write down recommendations to hear what folks say, but what I really, I think what's going to be helpful in moving us forward towards meeting our goal of having a written report finalized by into business next Friday, a week from today, is if, I've taken notes, I'm going to get a transcript, but if folks can please give me their recommendations in writing, that just jumpstarts it so much easier. And if you want to just take parts of the report that's already there that you like or don't like, just take photos of it and send it to June and I. I don't want this page, or circle the paragraph and say this is golden, let's keep that. But the more specific information you guys can get me with regards to findings and recommendations before Monday and certainly Tuesday, it's great, because this is a huge freaking bite out of my life right now, and it is for you guys too. So but the sooner we can do it, the better, because I don't have obligations this weekend, but I will next week. So does anyone else have anything else they want to talk about in terms of findings or recommendations? Yeah, go ahead, Michaela.
I mean, maybe to help you a little bit, the drug testing standard in Hawaii, although not required by companies to do it, many companies do, is in the drug testing, it says marijuana. And that's that because there's no differential between marijuana and hemp. If they test positive for THC, they just automatically that's marijuana. If they removed it from the drug testing standards in the state of Hawaii, that would solve the problem for the hemp industry, which now is legal in Hawaii, and then also the medical marijuana industry, which is also legal in Hawaii. But if you want to be specific, removing marijuana or hemp right now is just marijuana from the state of Hawaii drug testing, I guess say guidelines, the word marijuana. Of course, that would cause all these other problems. That would be just a specific thing you would ask for.
I think we'd, for once, get the dispensaries support on a bill. Something like that.
I think Ty is on the phone call, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I wrote that down as a recommendation, for sure.
We support it. We support it.
Yeah, I mean, we might have to work with DOH to find a way around. I mean,
it just sounds a little bit weird, right? Because they're both legal. Why is marijuana still in the drug testing guidelines?
I can't speak for DOH. Maybe we, and I don't know, obviously there's public perception as well. People don't want people impaired on the job, but I think Brittany brought up a point with regard to, well, we should probably be looking at behavior as well as just chemistry. But this is so outside my area of expertise. I'm not OSHA public safety health person. So, but I wrote down the recommendation for sure. I think we have to think about these other things. So how in terms of moving it forward, but hey, if the dispensaries want to take this and run, go for it. Brittany, I'm sorry. I see your hands up.
I just wanted to say that, Michele, I think that's an excellent suggestion. I appreciate that it is specific and it's actionable. So it creates a clear pathway of, what the recommendation is and did we accomplish that? It's measurable. And I think that, again, being that we have a legal medical cannabis industry, state legal medical cannabis industry in Hawaii and state and federally legal hemp industry, that it definitely makes sense to remove that. And it still would not prevent an employer from being able to assess risky behavior or any indication that somebody is actually intoxicated at work. And so, the employer would still obviously be able to take the appropriate measures in that situation. But being that THC can linger in the system for so long beyond any possible point of intoxication, it just really makes sense. So thank you for the suggestion. It's very appreciated.
Written down. Robert, go ahead.
Awesome. I really like that suggestion as well. When Ty is here and there was this already moved to at least move it to Schedule 3 on the federal level. So at least medicinal cannabis and hemp won't be so incompatible on the federal level for long, hopefully. But Senator Schatz passed this federal medicinal marijuana, I think they called it, and cannabinoid. So two different things. So that's a Research Expansion Act. So it's federally legal. And I think that is a potential pathway for Hawaii to regain its leadership role in the cannabis field and allow hemp farmers to interact with completely federally legal medicinal cannabis without the risk of losing all of our financial services. Perhaps if there was a large partnership with UH where all the state's medicinal patients and the growers of medicinal cannabis and the growers of CB hemp were allowed and really heavily supported on doing the research, and that could make Hawaii a world leader again, because it used to be all of the research was done by Ole Miss, and then it was like 8 universities, but they're trying to expand it. And I think with Hawaii's different microclimates and variety of small growers, we could do some large scale research with still remaining federally legal, but that would be a larger process. I also think that Sharon might have mentioned that we have our August 30th hard deadline, but like you said, we might be able to continue in some way to also have a secondary report where we have more time to bring in subject matter experts. Mahalo.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, so I heard a recommendation for promoting research partnership between UH, cannabis growers, and hemp, building on ideas that have been done in other areas. I know that Oregon State and, well, actually a number of states now have really great research institutions associated with their universities on hemp. And I think you were speaking more to the medicinal side of things. I might ask you to write that recommendation down because I may not.
Right, I'll try to clarify it because that law both affects theoretically the hemp and the medicinal cannabis, but only the federally legal medicinal cannabis, which until that official descheduling and all that takes effect, it would be a big lift by the universities to make that happen.
Okay. We got some hardcore people on here. 2 hours, 2 days, and 1 week. So I really want to thank everyone's contributions, especially. Oh yeah, Mikella, before I close it down, go ahead.
I don't know if there's enough time, but in the document, if you want to mention the current regulations, the current law says that for processors, if there's a violation, it's $10,000.
Oh yeah.
But it doesn't explain what triggers that violation for that $10,000. And then if you have 3, you lose your processor license. But is it better to add in to the current regulations what triggers the $10,000? Like, for instance, let's say your processing plant, something minor. Let's say, if you do ethanol and it can explode, and somebody leaves the door open to the processing room, but it's not processing. Does that trigger the 10,000? So I don't understand what triggers the $10,000 penalty.
Look, we got
DOA,
so maybe they can answer that. And then I thought we'd taken out. Well, I think we took the $10,000 penalty out of the production side. Sorry, I don't know 328 GUH, whatever by heart.
the processing side, yeah.
Processing side, yeah. Greg or Liam, are you guys there? Can you quickly speak to the fine aspects, just some clarification?
Yeah, with Greg coming to answer that.
Thank you.
Greg Edwards.
Yeah, there is no particular one trigger. It's a general enforcement tool that the department or the law gives the department this ability, dependent upon case-by-case basis. And that's pretty consistent across many regulated industries. Same thing in the food, regulated food industry.
Same thing with that, I'm sorry.
Which is where that was largely borrowed from the $10,000 from in a 328, not 328G, 328, which is food, drugs, and cosmetics. So it's not something that is uncommon to the regulatory authorities' enforcement toolbox. But to answer your question specifically, there isn't one particular item or non-compliance that would instantaneously trigger a $10,000 fine. It's like any enforcement action, it's dependent upon the particulars.
Yeah, and it's just to make sure that the processors are not breaking any rules, doing anything dangerous. It's a common, as Greg said, it's common regulatory system. I'm sure Gail, when she was a regulator, she had similar system. We have a same setup for the medical cannabis as well.
Yeah, I worked under the Clean Water Act, and actually the state I worked under had a lot of things specifically enumerated out. There wasn't a lot left for discretion. But I hear what you're saying, that amount is, it's not specific to hemp, but it's a common number that's used in Hawaii statute. Michaela, was that good enough? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it answers my question.
Okay, thank you. All right, go ahead, Robert.
If possible, I would love it if it said that both the Department of Health on the processing side and the Department of Ag doesn't have those $10,000 fines or any fines for hemp specifically. So any other industry would still be regulated like any other industry. And eliminating the fines is also eliminating the fee, because hemp is not profitable at this point, at least for if you are rich, maybe you could still pay the fine, but if they could eliminate the not the fine, but the fee and the fines from both HDOH and HUA would be great.
So you're asking for elimination of fines. I think just Robert, but my understanding was, I think DOH just clarified it's not specific to hemp, that $10,000 fine is a fine that's in other industries. Is that correct, Greg? That's a value that you guys have placed in a number of other industries as a regulatory stick?
Well, yes and no, like many things in hemp, it's yes and no. We borrowed that $10,000 penalty tool from existing statutes that regulate food, drugs, and cosmetics. Right, so that's what I'm getting at there. But it is specifically in 328G, which is hemp processors, which applies to retail sale as well as the processing side. But again, there isn't any one particular or two particular, or three particular itemized things that say you will be fined this amount if this is found to be non-compliant.
Correct. I think that's the regulatory uncertainty that makes potential processors a little bit nervous if there's a hemp specific rule that could be in violation, that's not a obvious rule that everybody should really know, that kind of a rule.
So it's in the law, so that's something that the legislature can take up.
Awesome.
Yeah, maybe enumerating a pathway or a rubric. I mean, sometimes depending on the enforcement agency, there's a rubric of, at what point the fines might be considered. Usually there's a warning letter and a process to go through. So we could suggest a rubric for that fine.
And eliminating those application fee for the processing would help, I think.
Yeah, that is high. Okay, I'll put that down, reduce that. We're at our 2 p.m. mark. We could go over, but unfortunately, if someone wants to take over as chair or June wants to, I'm at a hard stop today. I super appreciate everyone's time here. Before I stop, I would just really encourage everyone to please get your specific edits and comments to June and I by tomorrow afternoon, because I'm going to be able to do this Sunday. And then when we reconvene, we can dive in more specifically on the edits of certain sectors. So is there anyone else that wants to continue and I can just get off, or are we out for the day? I don't want to shut it down. But I have to leave.
I think we would end it for the day.
Okay, it's Friday. I've got more meetings. So. Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank you all. I want to thank Megan and Char, who also sat through this whole meeting. they definitely gave us a nice chunk of information that we can pull on and use. And I greatly appreciate everyone on this task force, and look forward to meeting with you next week. And thank you to the agencies for being here and being patient with us as we move forward. I know we all have the same goal, which is a better Hawaii for our kids. So thank you all.
I think we just need to call for adjournment.
Oh, okay. Do we have to make a motion? Okay.
There's no objection. You can adjourn.
Are there any objections to adjourning? Thank you. Thanks for keeping us on our, crossing our Ts and dotting. our Is.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
All
Aloha.
Thank you. Aloha.